The silk sheets beneath me felt like ice, despite the warmth of the Mediterranean night filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I lay perfectly still, counting the seconds between Dante's breaths, wondering if tonight would be different. It never was. 3 months of marriage, and my husband had never touched me beyond the cold press of his lips against my knuckles during our wedding ceremony. A performance for the 200 guests who'd filled the cathedral, their eyes hungry for the spectacle of Chicago's most feared crime lord claiming his bride. I was that bride, Aria Moretti, 23 years old, and already a widow in every way that mattered, except on paper. The restaurant where I'd worked, past tense, because that life ended the night Dante walked through those doors, had been my refuge. Giovanni's, a small Italian place in Little Italy where the tiles were cracked, the espresso machine temperamental, and the tips barely covered my nursing school textbooks. But it was mine, my space, my dream of something better than the cramped apartment I shared with my dying father and the mountain of medical bills that grew taller each week. I remembered the night with painful clarity. October rain had been hammering the windows, and I'd been balancing 4 plates of pasta when the door opened. The temperature in the room dropped, conversations died mid-sentence. Even Giovanni, who'd survived 60 years in this neighborhood and claimed to fear nothing, went pale. 3 men entered first, broad-shouldered, wearing dark suits that cost more than my annual salary, their eyes scanning every corner, every exit. Then he walked in. Dante Salvatore. I'd seen his face in newspapers, heard his name whispered with equal parts reverence and terror, but nothing prepared me for the reality of him. 6'3" of controlled violence wrapped in a custom Tom Ford suit, dark hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a Renaissance statue if not for the thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He couldn't have been more than 28, but his eyes held centuries of darkness. He'd chosen the corner table, of course he did, back to the wall, facing the entrance, and I'd been the unfortunate server on shift. My hands had trembled as I approached. The plates felt impossibly heavy. His security detail watched my every movement like hawks tracking a mouse, and I could feel the weight of something dangerous settling over my shoulders. "Welcome to Giovanni's," I'd managed, my voice smaller than I'd intended. "Can I start you with—" That's when it happened. My shoe, cheap, worn thin from double shifts, caught on absolutely nothing, and the world tilted. 4 plates of pasta, expensive wine, and my dignity crashed toward Dante Salvatore's $3,000 suit. Time crystallized. I saw my life ending in that fraction of a second. Not the life I had, but the life I'd hoped for. Nursing school, saving my father, escape. His hand shot out, catching my wrist with reflexes that seemed almost preternatural. The plates clattered harmlessly to the side as he pulled me upright, steadying me with a grip that was firm but strangely gentle. Our eyes met. His were the color of aged whiskey, flecked with gold, and for a moment, just a heartbeat. Something flickered in their depths that made my breath catch. Not anger. Something else. Something that felt like recognition. "Careful, Piccola," he'd murmured, his voice a low rumble that I felt in my chest. "The floor is treacherous." His men had immediately moved to clean the mess, barking orders at Giovanni, but Dante's gaze never left my face. His thumb had pressed against the inside of my wrist, probably feeling my jackrabbit pulse, and the corner of his mouth had curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "What's your name?" Aria." The word stumbled out. "I'm so sorry. I'll pay for your suit. Aria." He'd tested the word like a fine wine. "You work here every night?" I should have lied. Should have sensed the trap, but my father's oxygen tank was running low, and the hospital had called twice that day about past due bills, and I was so tired of lying that the truth just fell out. 6 nights a week. I'm saving for nursing school. His expression had shifted then, something calculating sliding behind his eyes. Noble. He'd released my wrist, but the imprint of his fingers remained, burning against my skin like a brand. He'd reached into his jacket, his guards tensed immediately, and pulled out a black leather wallet, extracting a business card. "You need money for school?" He'd placed the card on the table between us. Come work for me. Better pay, better hours. I'd stared at that card like it was a snake. Everyone knew what working for Dante Salvatore meant. Laundering money through front businesses, looking the other way, becoming complicit. Thank you, but I can't think about it. He'd stood then, towering over me, and the scent of him, expensive cologne mixed with something darker, like gunpowder and cedar, made my head spin. You're wasting your potential here, Arya. He'd left $1,000 on the table for a $40 meal. I'd thrown the business card away that night. Tried to forget those whiskey-colored eyes and the way my name had sounded in his mouth. 2 days later, my father's hospital called. Someone had paid his entire bill, $60,000, cleared overnight. When I'd demanded to know who, the administrator had simply handed me an envelope. Inside was a new business card and a note in sharp, masculine handwriting. Consider it an investment, DS. I should have known then. Should have understood that men like Dante Salvatore didn't give gifts. They made purchases. The trap had already closed. I just hadn't felt the jaws snap shut yet. Now, lying in his bed, our bed, though we inhabited it like strangers on a vast silk ocean, I pressed my hand to the place where he'd first touched my wrist. The ghost of that moment still lingered. 3 months and a nightmare of a wedding later. The marriage had been his price, not for my father's medical bills, those were already paid, but for something else entirely. I'd learned the truth 2 weeks after that first encounter, when 2 of Dante's men showed up at my apartment with an offer that wasn't really an offer at all. My father's doctor, Dr. Marcus Chen, the only specialist who'd agreed to take his case, had been stealing from Dante, embezzling money through fake medical supply companies, skimming hundreds of thousands from the Salvatore family's legitimate pharmaceutical holdings. When Dante's people had discovered it, they'd traced the connection. To my father. To me. The ledgers showed my father's name on dozens of transactions, forged I'd later learn, but Dante hadn't known that then. All he'd known was that someone named Thomas Moretti had helped steal from him, and that someone had a daughter who'd literally fallen into his arms. "Marry me," Dante had said when I'd been dragged to his office. A penthouse suite overlooking Lake Michigan, all dark wood and leather, and the scent of expensive cigars. 1 year. A marriage of convenience. You play the dutiful wife, and your father lives. You refuse. He hadn't finished the sentence, hadn't needed to. I'd said yes with tears streaming down my face, while Dante had watched with those unreadable whiskey eyes, and something that might have been regret flickering in their depths. The wedding had been a spectacle. A cathedral full of Chicago's elite and criminal underworld, me in a Vera Wang gown that cost more than my father's hospital bills, Dante in a black tux that made him look like a dark angel. He'd slipped a platinum ring onto my finger, 3 carats of flawless diamond that felt like a shackle, and kissed my hand with lips so cold they'd burned. "You're mine now, Piccola," he'd whispered against my skin, in every way that matters, but he'd never touched me. Never claimed the marital rights that the priest had blessed and the contract had implied. Our wedding night, I'd stood in the bathroom of our penthouse for an hour, sick with fear, before finally emerging to find him sitting in an armchair by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "I'm not a monster," he'd said, without looking at me. "I won't force you into my bed. The marriage is political, nothing more." Relief, and something else, something I didn't want to name, had flooded through me. 3 months later, and the distance between us felt like an ocean. We lived like ghosts in his sprawling penthouse. He left before I woke, returned after I'd retreated to my room. Yes, my room, separate from his, because apparently even sharing a bed was too much intimacy for a marriage built on coercion and lies. I saw him at dinners with his associates, at charity galas where I played the perfect wife, at family gatherings where his mother looked at me with pity and his sister with barely concealed hostility. I wore the clothes his stylist selected, smiled when his hand rested on the small of my back for photos, and returned to my gilded cage every night wondering when the other shoe would drop. Because it would drop. Men like Dante Salvatore didn't keep pets without eventually demanding something in return. The clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m. Dante still hadn't come to bed. His bed, not mine, but I'd found him here an hour ago, passed out on top of the covers, still wearing his suit. And something in me had broken. some dam of loneliness and confusion that I'd been holding back, so I'd lain down beside him, not touching. Never touching, but close enough to feel his warmth and pretend, just for a moment, that this was real. His breathing changed. I froze. Arya. My name, rough with sleep, and then his hand found mine in the darkness, fingers intertwining. Why are you here? I don't know, I whispered, because lying seemed impossible in the dark. I was tired of being alone. His grip tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, and I could feel the war happening inside him. Control versus something else. Something dangerous and wanting. Then he released me and sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The loss of his warmth felt like winter arriving early. Go back to your room, Arya. Dante. Go. The command in his voice left no room for argument. I fled, fighting tears I didn't understand, and missed the way his hands clenched into fists, or the way he stared at the place where I'd been lying like a man dying of thirst, staring at water. The next morning, everything changed. I'd developed a routine in my cage. Wake at 8, breakfast alone in the massive kitchen, avoid Dante's staff who looked at me with either pity or contempt, wonder what the hell my life had become. But that morning, Rosa, Dante's housekeeper, and the only person who'd shown me genuine kindness, greeted me with worry etched across her face. Mrs. Salvatore, your husband would like to see you in his office. Immediately, the word immediately, sent ice through my veins. In 3 months, Dante had never summoned me. We existed in parallel worlds, intersecting only when necessary. His office was on the top floor, a space I'd been explicitly told never to enter without permission. I knocked, my knuckles barely making a sound against the heavy oak door. Enter. The office was exactly what I'd expected. Dark leather, mahogany furniture that probably cost more than a car, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. What I hadn't expected was the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Dante stood behind his desk, still wearing yesterday's shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his tie discarded somewhere. He looked like he hadn't slept. 2 of his men flanked the doorway, Marco and Vincent, the ones who'd dragged me to this life, and their presence made my stomach clench. Sit. Dante gestured to the chair across from his desk. I sat, smoothing my hands over the simple dress I'd chosen. Everything in my new wardrobe was designer, carefully selected by someone who understood the image a Mafia wife should project, but I still felt like a child playing dress-up. Dante picked up a folder from his desk, studied it for a long moment, then looked at me with those whiskey eyes that seemed to see straight through skin and bone to the terrified girl beneath. Your father. He opened the folder, revealing documents covered in numbers and legal jargon. He's innocent. The words took a moment to register. What? The embezzlement. The money Dr. Chen stole. Dante's jaw tightened. Your father's signature was forged. Chen used his identity, his medical license, to create shell companies. Thomas Moretti never touched $1 of my money. The room tilted. I gripped the armrest to keep from falling. 3 months. 3 months of this marriage, this prison, this nightmare, and my father had been innocent all along. You're telling me this now? My voice came out sharper than I'd intended, anger burning through shock. I gave up everything. I discovered it 2 weeks ago. Dante's tone remained level, but something dark flickered across his face. My investigators found Chen's real records. The forgeries were sophisticated, but not perfect. 2 weeks. He'd known for 2 weeks and said nothing. So what happens now? I stood, unable to sit still with rage coursing through my veins. Do I get my life back? Do you just let me go? The silence that followed was deafening. Dante moved around the desk with the predatory grace of a panther, each step measured and deliberate. He stopped close enough that I could smell his cologne, that cedar and gunpowder scent that had haunted my dreams, and when he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. No. No? I laughed, but it came out broken. My father's innocent. The reason for this whole charade doesn't exist anymore. You can't just... The marriage is legal, Arya. Binding. His hand came up and I flinched before I could stop myself. He froze, something like pain crossing his features before his expression hardened again. I'm not going to hurt you. I've never... He exhaled roughly. Read this. He handed me a newspaper, folded to the society section. There, in glossy color, was a photo from last week's charity gala. Me in a silver gown, Dante's arm around my waist, both of us smiling for the camera. The headline read, "Chicago's Most Eligible Bachelor Tamed. Inside the Salvatore Marriage." "I don't understand. You've become valuable, Piccola." Dante's finger traced the edge of the newspaper, careful not to touch me. "My enemies see you as my weakness. My allies see you as proof of my stability. My mother." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "My mother actually likes you. Do you know how rare that is? So I'm what? A political asset now instead of collateral?" The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "How is that better?" "It's not." He turned away, staring out at the city he controlled through fear and violence. "But it's reality. You're safer as my wife than you would be as my ex-wife. My enemies would use you to get to me. And He stopped, shoulders tensing. "I won't allow that." "You mean you won't allow your reputation to be damaged?" When he looked back at me, something burned in his eyes that made my breath catch. "I mean, I won't allow anyone to hurt you." The words hung between us, heavy with implications I didn't want to examine. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor shifted, the moment of vulnerability vanishing behind the cold mask of the Mafia boss. "Marco will take you shopping today. You need a new dress for Saturday's event." He was already moving toward the door, dismissing me. "Buy whatever you want. No limit." "I don't want your money." He paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked back at me with something almost like regret. "I know. But take it anyway. Consider it payment for services rendered." Then he was gone, leaving me standing in his office with a newspaper photo of a lie, and the devastating knowledge that my cage had just become permanent. The shopping trip was torture. Marco drove me in one of Dante's armored SUVs, because apparently my life now required bulletproof glass and a former Special Forces operative as a babysitter. The boutiques we visited were the kind where they served champagne, and everything cost more than my monthly rent used to be. I hated it. Hated the obsequious salespeople who called me Mrs. Salvatore with reverence. Hated the dresses that cost thousands of dollars. Hated the way Marco stood by the entrance, hand near his concealed weapon, scanning for threats to a woman who was already a prisoner. But most of all, I hated that part of me, a small, traitorous part, enjoyed the luxury. The silk against my skin, the perfect fit of expertly tailored clothes, the way the world bent around Dante's name, and, by extension, around me. I was trying on a red dress, crimson silk that hugged every curve, when I heard a familiar voice from the main floor of the boutique. "Aria? Oh my God, is that really you?" "Jessica. My best friend from nursing school, from my old life, from before everything had gone to hell." I hadn't seen her since the wedding, hadn't returned her calls, hadn't been able to face the questions I knew she'd ask. I emerged from the dressing room to find her staring at me like I'd risen from the dead. She looked exactly the same, messy blonde ponytail, scrubs under her jacket, the exhausted but determined expression of someone grinding through clinical rotations. She looked free. "Jess." Her name came out strangled. "What are you doing here?" "Shopping for my sister's birthday." "What are you—" She took in the expensive boutique, the pile of designer clothes, Marco lurking by the entrance. "Holy shit. You really married him." "I thought maybe the news was exaggerating, but you actually married Dante Salvatore." The judgment in her voice stung like a slap. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "Aria, he's a criminal. Everyone knows what he does. The drugs, the gambling, I know what he is." I cut her off, aware of Marco's attention shifting toward us. The last thing I needed was for Dante to hear I'd been discussing his business in public. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. But her expression softened when she saw whatever was written on my face. "Are you okay? Really?" Was I? I lived in a penthouse that felt like a museum, wore clothes that cost more than life-saving medication, slept alone in a room down the hall from a husband who'd married me under false pretenses and refused to touch me, but also refused to let me go. "I'm fine," I lied. Jess didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but before she could push further, Marco stepped forward. Mrs. Salvatore, we need to go. Mr. Salvatore expects you home by 4. The reminder of my invisible leash made something snap inside me. Tell Mr. Salvatore I'll come home when I'm ready. Marco's expression didn't change, but I saw his hand move to his phone. Ma'am. Give me 5 minutes with my friend, please. He hesitated, then nodded curtly and stepped back, though I could see him texting, undoubtedly reporting my small rebellion to Dante. Jess grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a corner where Marco couldn't hear. Come with me, right now. We'll figure something out. You can stay with me. I can't. The words tasted like ash. It's not that simple. Why not? What's he got on you? Everything. Nothing. The truth was too complicated to explain. My father's medical bills, the forged documents, the binding marriage contract, and beneath it all, the confusing tangle of fear and something else I felt every time Dante looked at me. He'll find me, I said instead. Men like him always do. Then we go to the police. Half the police are on his payroll, Jess. I squeezed her hand, memorizing the warmth of real human connection. I appreciate the thought, but there's no escape from this. I just have to survive it. Her eyes filled with tears. This isn't surviving, Arya. This is dying slowly. Maybe she was right. But before I could respond, Marco was there, his expression urgent. Mrs. Salvatore, we need to leave. Now. Something in his tone sent alarm bells ringing. What's wrong? Mr. Salvatore's orders. We're going home immediately. He practically dragged me toward the exit, and I barely had time to grab my purse and mouth "I'm sorry" to Jess before I was being hustled into the SUV. Marco drove like a man fleeing demons, weaving through traffic with barely controlled aggression. What's going on? I demanded. Marco, talk to me. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Mr. Salvatore received some information. He wants you home where you're safe. Safe from what? But Marco wouldn't say another word, and the 20-minute drive back to the penthouse felt like an eternity. When we arrived, the building was swarming with Dante's men. At least a dozen guards I'd never seen before, all wearing the subtle earpieces and hard expressions of professional security. They nodded at Marco as we passed, and I caught fragments of their radio chatter. Perimeter secure. No signs of breach. Bosses in the penthouse. My heart hammered against my ribs as Marco escorted me upstairs. The elevator ride was suffocating, and when the doors opened to the penthouse, I found Dante pacing like a caged predator in the living room. He spun toward me the moment I entered, and the raw emotion on his face, fear, anger, something else I couldn't name, made me stop in my tracks. Where the hell were you? He crossed the space between us in 3 strides, his hands coming up to grip my shoulders. Not hard, never hard, but firm enough that I couldn't look away from the storm in his eyes. I told Marco to have you home by 4. It's 4:30. I was talking to a friend. You don't have friends anymore, Arya. You have people who can be used against you. His hands moved to cup my face, tilting it up so I had no choice but to meet his gaze. Do you understand? Every person you talk to, every place you go without protection. You're painting a target on your back. I had Marco with me. Marco's good, but he's one man. Dante's thumb traced my cheekbone, the gesture almost tender despite the fury in his voice. I received a call today. Someone's asking questions about you, about your father, about the embezzlement case. Ice flooded my veins. Who? I don't know yet, but when I find out... His expression turned lethal, and I saw the monster he kept leashed beneath the expensive suits and careful control. Anyone who tries to hurt you will learn exactly why people fear the Salvatore name. He was still holding my face, his touch burning against my skin, and I realized with a start that this was the most he'd touched me since our wedding. The realization must have shown on my face because his expression shifted, awareness flickering in his eyes. He released me abruptly, stepping back like I'd burned him. You're not to leave the penthouse without my explicit permission. Not for shopping, not for coffee, not for anything. Do you understand? You're locking me up? Anger flared, hot and righteous. I'm already a prisoner, Dante. Now you're taking away even the illusion of freedom? I'm keeping you alive. He turned away, raking a hand through his hair. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, they look the same. When he looked back at me, something had changed in his expression. The mask had slipped, and beneath it was a hunger that made my breath catch. You think I want this? You think I enjoy watching you look at me like I'm your jailer? Then let me go. I can't. The words were torn from him, raw and honest. I've tried, Piccola. God knows I've tried. But every time I think about you walking out that door, about you being out there where I can't protect you. He stopped, jaw clenching. I'd rather keep you here and have you hate me than lose you to my enemies. The confession hung between us, loaded with implications that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. This wasn't about political marriages or family obligations anymore. This was something darker, more possessive. This was obsession. Before I could process it, before I could decide if I should run toward or away from the dangerous truth in his eyes, his phone rang. He answered it with a curt, "What?" Then listened, his expression hardening with each passing second. "Where?" A pause. "How many?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Handle it. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been regret. "I have to go. Business. Marco and 3 other guards will stay here with you. Do not leave this penthouse, Arya. I mean it." "When will you be back?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Why? Planning to miss me?" "Planning to know when I can stop feeling like I'm suffocating." His expression darkened, but beneath the anger was hurt, quick and sharp before he buried it. "Midnight, probably. There's food in the kitchen. Rosa left your favorite pasta." He knew my favorite pasta. The thought was more unsettling than it should have been. Dante moved toward the door, but paused at the threshold, his back to me. "I meant what I said, Arya. Anyone who tries to hurt you answers to me. And I'm not a merciful man." Then he was gone, taking the oxygen from the room with him. And I was left standing in my golden cage, wondering when exactly I'd stopped wanting to escape. The hours after Dante left dragged like years. I tried to read, to watch television, to do anything that would quiet the restless energy thrumming through my veins. But nothing worked. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Beautiful, expensive, and suffocatingly empty. Around 8, Rosa brought dinner to my room. She set the tray down with practiced efficiency, but her eyes held concern. "You should eat, Mrs. Salvatore. You barely touched lunch." "I'm not hungry." The lie was automatic. My stomach had been in knots since Dante's confession. "I'd rather keep you here and have you hate me than lose you." And food seemed impossible. Rosa hesitated at the door. "He worries about you, you know, more than he should. He has a funny way of showing it. Mr. Dante. He's not good with emotions, never has been." She smoothed her apron, choosing her words carefully. "His father was a hard man, taught him that love is weakness, that caring makes you vulnerable. But I've worked for this family for 20 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The words settled into my chest like stones. "How does he look at me?" Rosa smiled sadly. "Like you're the only thing in the world worth protecting, and the one thing he's terrified to lose." She left before I could respond, and I stared at the untouched pasta, homemade carbonara, my favorite, wondering how many other details Dante had quietly learned about me while maintaining his careful distance. Midnight came and went, then 1 a.m., 2. I told myself I wasn't waiting for him, told myself I didn't care if he came home at all, but at 2:30, when I heard the elevator doors open, my heart leapt traitorously in my chest. I crept to my bedroom door, opening it just enough to see into the living room. Dante stood by the windows, his jacket discarded, his white shirt stained with something dark that made my stomach clench. Blood. Not his. He moved without injury, but someone's. Marco appeared from the elevator, his expression grim. "The situation is handled. Bianchi won't be asking questions about Mrs. Salvatore anymore." Bianchi. I recognized the name from whispered conversations I'd overheard at family dinners. One of Dante's rivals, always pushing boundaries, always testing limits. And his associates? Dante's voice was cold, empty of anything resembling mercy. Given the same message, very clearly. Dante nodded, dismissing Marco with a gesture, and then he was alone. I watched as the mask finally cracked. Watched him brace his hands against the window, head bowed, shoulders rigid with tension that looked like it might shatter him. "You can come out, Arya." His voice carried across the space, resigned. "I know you're there. I considered retreating, pretending I hadn't been watching, but something pulled me forward. I crossed the living room in my bare feet, silk pajamas whispering against my skin, until I stood a few feet behind him. Whose blood is that? No one who matters. He didn't turn around. You should be asleep. I couldn't sleep. Waiting for me? There was something brittle in his laugh. Or hoping I wouldn't come back. The honest answer terrified me, so I deflected. What did you do to Bianchi? Finally he turned. His eyes were dark, haunted, and the blood on his shirt stood out like an accusation. I reminded him that there are consequences for threatening what belongs to me. I'm not a possession. Aren't you? He moved closer, and I could smell the copper tang of blood mixing with his cologne. I own you, Piccola. On paper, in the eyes of the world, in every way that matters. The only thing I don't own is your heart, and sometimes I think that's worse than owning nothing at all. The confession hung between us, raw and bleeding. I should have been disgusted by the blood, by the violence, by the casual way he discussed ownership. But instead, I found myself reaching out, my fingers hovering near the stain on his shirt. You're hurt. It's not my blood. I know. But you're still hurt. My hand pressed flat against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath my palm. Here. He went absolutely still, every muscle locked, like one wrong move would shatter whatever fragile thing had formed between us. Aria, why won't you touch me? The question escaped before I could stop it. You married me, claimed me, kept me prisoner here, but you won't, you never. Because once I start, I won't stop. His hand covered mine, pressing it harder against his chest. Do you understand? The only thing keeping you safe from me is distance. The moment I break that barrier, the moment I let myself have you the way I want. He stopped, jaw clenching. You'll truly be trapped. No more separate rooms, no more pretending this is anything but what it is. And what is it? His other hand came up, fingers tangling in my hair, tilting my face toward his. We were so close I could feel his breath against my lips, could see the gold flecks in his whiskey-colored eyes. Obsession, he whispered. From the moment you fell into my arms at that restaurant, I've been obsessed with you. Your smile, your kindness, the way you try so hard to be brave even when you're terrified. I told myself it was just attraction, that once we were married I'd get over it. But it's gotten worse, Piccola. Every day you're in my house wearing my ring, bearing my name. It makes me insane. Then why push me away? Because you deserve better than a monster who takes what he wants. His thumb traced my lower lip, and I shivered. You deserve someone who'll let you finish nursing school, who'll take you on normal dates, who'll give you the life you were supposed to have. Not someone who'll lock you in a golden cage and never let you go. The irony made me laugh, sharp and a little hysterical. You already did that. The cage exists whether you touch me or not. Something snapped in his expression, control giving way to the hunger he'd been holding back for 3 months. Don't say things like that unless you mean them. What if I do? The words were insane, reckless. But standing here in the dark with his hand in my hair and his heart pounding beneath my palm, I couldn't remember why I should be afraid. What if I'm tired of the distance? What if I didn't get to finish? His mouth crashed against mine with 3 months of pent-up desire, and the world tilted. His kiss was nothing like the chaste press of lips at our wedding. This was claiming, consuming, absolutely possessive. His hand tightened in my hair while the other wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against him until no space remained between us. I should have been frightened, should have remembered that this man had just come home covered in someone else's blood, that he'd openly admitted to obsession, that this was exactly the trap I'd been trying to avoid. But when his mouth moved to my neck, teeth grazing the sensitive skin there, all I could think was finally, Aria. My name was a prayer and a curse. Tell me to stop. Tell me you don't want this, and I'll walk away. I'll go back to my room, and we'll pretend this never happened. And if I don't tell you to stop? His arms tightened around me, and when he pulled back to look at me, the raw need in his eyes stole my breath. Then you're mine. Completely. No more separate rooms, no more distance. I'll give you everything, Piccola, protection, loyalty, every piece of myself that's worth having. But in return, you stay. You don't run. You don't leave. You accept that you belong to me. It was a devil's bargain. A beautiful prison with the door slammed shut. But looking at Dante, at the blood on his shirt from violence committed in my name, at the vulnerability breaking through his carefully constructed walls, at the promise of something real in a marriage built on lies, I realized I'd already made my choice. Maybe I'd made it that night in the restaurant when I'd fallen into his arms. Maybe I'd made it when I'd said I do, with tears streaming down my face. Or maybe I was making it right now, standing in the darkness with a monster who looked at me like I was salvation and damnation wrapped in silk pajamas. I'm tired of being alone, I whispered, echoing the words from last night that had sent him running. I'm tired of pretending this marriage is nothing. I'm tired of... He kissed me again, swallowing the rest of my confession, and this time I kissed him back, my hands fisted in his blood-stained shirt, pulling him closer, and the sound he made, desperate and victorious, sent heat pooling low in my stomach. Bedroom. He growled against my mouth. Now. Yours or mine? Ours. He swept me into his arms effortlessly, carrying me down the hallway. There's no yours or mine anymore, Piccola. Just us. He kicked open the door to the master bedroom, his bedroom, and the implications of that threshold crashed over me. But before doubt could take root, he laid me down on the silk sheets with surprising gentleness, his body covering mine. Last chance, he said, even as his hands traced patterns of fire along my ribs. Once we cross this line, there's no going back. I won't be able to let you go, Arya. Ever. I reached up, cupping his face, feeling the rough stubble against my palms. Then don't. The last threads of his control snapped. His mouth found mine again while his hands learned every curve, every dip, every place that made me gasp. The blood-stained shirt joined my pajamas on the floor, and the vulnerability of skin against skin felt like truth, messy and complicated and undeniably real. He worshipped me with a devotion that bordered on religious, murmuring Italian words I didn't understand against my heated skin. When he finally made me his, in every sense that mattered, the pain was brief, and the pleasure that followed overwhelming. Mine, he breathed against my neck, moving inside me with exquisite care. Say it. Tell me you're mine. Yours, I gasped, because it was true. Somewhere between falling into his arms and falling into his bed, I'd become his, completely, irrevocably. When we finally collapsed together, tangled in silk sheets in each other, he pulled me against his chest like he was afraid I'd disappear. His heartbeat thundered beneath my ear, gradually slowing to something approaching normal. I never thanked you, I whispered into the darkness. For what? My father's hospital bills. You saved his life. His arms tightened around me. I thought I was buying your cooperation. Turns out I was buying my own destruction. What do you mean? He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, tender in a way that contradicted everything I knew about him. You can't love a monster, Piccola, but you can make him human, and humans break so much easier than monsters do. I tilted my head back to look at him, this complicated man who'd trapped me and freed me in the same breath. Who says I can't love a monster? His expression cracked open, and in that moment, I saw past the Mafia boss, past the violence and control, to the lonely boy who'd learned love was weakness, and caring made you vulnerable. Don't, he whispered, and it sounded like begging. Don't love me, Arya. I'll only disappoint you. Too late. The words were reckless, but they were also true. Somewhere in the cage he'd built around me, I'd started building one around him too. I think I started falling the night we met. He kissed me then, slow and deep, and I tasted salt, tears, though I couldn't tell whose. When he finally pulled back, his thumb traced my swollen lips. Then God help us both, he murmured, because I fell that same night, and I've been drowning ever since. We made love again, slower this time, learning each other's rhythms and sounds. And when dawn painted the windows gold, I lay in his arms and wondered if love and possession could somehow be the same thing. If they could, I was willing to find out. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of discovery and domesticity that felt surreal. Dante still left for business, still came home wearing violence like cologne. but now I had a place in his bed and his life that felt undeniably real. He was possessive to the point of obsession, tracking my movements through the penthouse, questioning Marco about every minute I spent without him, pulling me onto his lap during family dinners to establish ownership. His mother raised eyebrows but said nothing. His sister Maria looked at me with something approaching respect. But there were cracks in our fragile happiness. Whispers at family gatherings about rivals growing bold. Phone calls that made Dante's expression turn lethal. The ever-present guards that multiplied like shadows. Something was coming. I could feel it in the tension that wound tighter each day, in the way Dante held me at night like I might vanish. The explosion came on a Tuesday. I was in the penthouse library, a room I'd claimed as my own, filled with medical textbooks because Dante had quietly arranged for me to continue my studies remotely. When raised voices drifted from the living room, "Can't keep her locked up forever, Dante." "People are talking," Maria's voice, sharp with frustration. "Let them talk." Dante sounded dangerous. "Arya stays here where she's safe." "She's not a doll, Fratello. She's a person. This obsession you have is none of your concern. It is when it makes you weak." A man's voice, unfamiliar. "The families are questioning your leadership. They see you choosing a woman over business, and it makes them wonder if you're still fit to lead." The sound of glass shattering. "Get out. Both of you." "Dante," Maria tried. "Out." I heard them leave, and then silence. Dangerous, suffocating silence. I should have stayed in the library, should have pretended I hadn't heard, but something pulled me toward the living room. Dante stood among the shattered remains of a whiskey glass, his hands clenched into fists, violence radiating from every line of his body. "How much did you hear?" He didn't look at me. "Enough." I moved closer, careful of the broken glass. "Am I making you weak?" "You're making me human." He finally looked at me, and the raw emotion in his eyes made my chest ache. "And in my world, that's the same thing. Then maybe your world needs to change." He laughed, bitter and broken. "Change? Piccola, I'm drowning in a legacy of violence and control. My father built this empire on fear, and I've spent my whole life maintaining it. The moment I show weakness, the moment the other families think I care about something more than power, they'll use me against you." "Exactly." He crossed to me, pulling me against his chest like an anchor. "That's why you stay here, why you don't leave without a full security detail. Why I can't—" His voice broke. "I can't lose you, Arya. I won't survive it." I pressed my face against his shirt, breathing him in. Then we faced them together. You and me. "Let them see that I'm not your weakness. I'm your strength. You don't understand how this works. So teach me." I pulled back to look at him. "I'm already trapped in your world, Dante. At least let me be your partner instead of your prisoner." For a long moment, he just stared at me, warring with himself. Then his phone rang, Marco's name flashing across the screen. Dante answered, his expression hardening with each word. "When? How many? I'll be there in 10 minutes. He hung up and looked at me with something like grief. "I have to go. There's been an incident at one of the warehouses. Marco will stay with you." "No." His eyes narrowed. "Arya." I said no. "You don't get to shut me out anymore." I grabbed his jacket from where it hung over a chair. "If I'm going to be part of this world, then I'm going to understand it. Take me with you." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. And keeping me locked here isn't." I held his gaze, refusing to back down. "Someone's already asking questions about me. Bianchi tried to use me against you. How long before the next person does? At least if I see what you're dealing with, I'll understand the threats." The war on his face was painful to watch. Possessive fear versus grudging respect. Finally, he exhaled roughly. "Fine. But you stay in the car. You stay with Marco. And if anything goes wrong, I know. You'll burn the city down." I smiled despite the gravity of the moment. "You've made that abundantly clear." Something like pride flickered in his eyes. "You're going to be the death of me, Piccola. Or your salvation. We'll find out which." He kissed me hard and fast, then pulled me toward the elevator. "Come on." And Arya? When I tell you to run, you run. Understood? I nodded, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. I'd just demanded entry into a world of violence and shadows, and I had no idea if I'd survive what came next. But I'd survive it with Dante, and somehow, that made all the difference. The warehouse sat on the edge of the industrial district, a hulking structure of corrugated metal and shadows. Even from inside the SUV, I could feel the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Dante had been silent during the 20-minute drive, his jaw clenched, one hand absently rubbing circles on my knee. A gesture I'd learned meant he was working through scenarios, calculating risks. Marco drove with the same focused intensity, occasionally speaking into his radio in clipped Italian. "What exactly are we dealing with?" I asked, as we pulled up to a cluster of similar vehicles, all black, all expensive, all screaming criminal enterprise. "Someone hit the warehouse, stole a shipment." Dante's voice was cold, empty. "This location handles pharmaceuticals, the legitimate kind that fund the less legitimate parts of my business. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were taking and when to take it." "An inside job?" His eyes cut to me, surprised. "You're learning." I pay attention. I watched as armed men, at least a dozen, moved around the perimeter. What happens to whoever's responsible? Nothing good. He opened his door, then paused. "Stay here. Marco, do not let her out of this vehicle unless the building is on fire. Understood?" "Yes, boss." Dante pressed a kiss to my forehead, lingering longer than necessary. "I mean it, Arya." "Stay put." Then he was gone, striding toward the warehouse entrance with the lethal grace of a predator. His men fell into formation around him automatically, and I watched through the tinted windows as he disappeared inside. Marco remained in the driver's seat, alert, but relaxed. "He's different with you," he said after a moment. "Different how?" "Softer. Before you, he was just—" Marco searched for the word. "Cold. Efficient. He did what needed doing without hesitation. But now there's doubt. Second-guessing. It makes him human. And that's bad? In his world? Yes." Marco's eyes scanned the perimeter constantly. "But maybe human is what he needs to be. What we all need to be." Before I could respond, shouting erupted from inside the warehouse. Then gunshots. Sharp cracks that made my heart slam against my ribs. Marco's hand went to his weapon. "Stay down." More gunshots. Shouting in Italian. The sound of something heavy crashing. Every instinct screamed at me to run inside, to make sure Dante was okay, but Marco's presence kept me pinned in place. Then the warehouse doors burst open, and Dante emerged dragging someone by the collar, a younger man, bloodied and terrified. He threw him to the ground in front of the assembled guards. "Talk," Dante commanded, his voice carrying across the lot. "Who hired you?" The man spat blood. "Go to hell." Dante's fist connected with his jaw so fast I barely saw it move. The crack echoed like another gunshot. Wrong answer. Try again. I should have looked away, should have been horrified by the casual violence, but I couldn't stop watching Dante, the cold precision in his movements, the way his men looked at him with equal parts fear and respect, the absolute authority in every word. This was who he really was. Not the man who held me tenderly in the dark, but the monster he'd warned me about. And God help me, I still wanted him. "The Rossi family," the man finally gasped. "They paid me 50 grand to steal the shipment and leave evidence pointing to the Castellanos." Dante went very still. "The Rossis want to start a war between me and Castellano? They think if you're busy fighting each other, they can expand their territory." Dante looked at Marco. "Contact Castellano. Tell him we need to meet. Tonight." Then to the bloodied man. "You're going to tell him exactly what you told me. And pray he's merciful, because I'm not feeling generous." He turned toward the SUV, and even through the tinted windows, I could see the violence still simmering in his eyes. Marco tensed beside me. "He's going to be volatile," Marco warned quietly. "Just be patient with him." Dante yanked open the door and climbed in, bringing the scent of blood and gunpowder with him. His knuckles were split, blood seeping through the skin, but he didn't seem to notice. "Drive," he ordered Marco, then looked at me. "You shouldn't have seen that. You brought me." "I shouldn't have." He stared at his bloody hands like they belonged to someone else. "This is what I am, Arya. What I'll always be. Violence and blood and decisions that would horrify normal people." I reached for his hands, ignoring the blood, and pulled them into my lap. "Let me see. They're fine." "They're not fine. And I'm not helpless." I examined the split knuckles, the bruising already forming. "You need ice and antiseptic." "It's nothing. It's something to me." I looked up at him, and whatever he saw in my expression made his features soften fractionally. "You can be a monster to everyone else, Dante, but let me take care of you anyway." Something shifted in his eyes, vulnerability breaking through the violence. "Why? After what you just saw, I saw you protecting what's yours. I saw you being smart enough to prevent a war. I squeezed his damaged hands gently. "I saw the man I married doing what he has to do to survive in an impossible world." He pulled me across the seat, settling me in his lap despite Marco's presence in the front. His face buried in my hair, and I felt him shaking. Adrenaline or emotion, I couldn't tell. "You're going to ruin me," he whispered against my ear, "completely destroy every defense I've ever built." "Good." "You've already ruined me." His arms tightened. "Not ruined, claimed." "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Ruination is careless. What I feel for you..." He pulled back to look at me, and the intensity in his gaze stole my breath. "It's meticulous, deliberate. I'm building a fortress around you with my own hands, and I'll burn anyone who tries to breach it. Even yourself?" "Especially myself." He kissed me, tasting like violence and devotion. "If I ever become the thing that hurts you, Piccola, I'll destroy myself before I let it continue." Marco cleared his throat from the front seat. "Boss, we're approaching the penthouse. Castellano agreed to meet in 2 hours." Dante cursed softly. "I need to shower, change, prepare." He looked at me. "And you need to stay hidden. If Castellano knows how much you mean to me..." "I understand." I touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Do what you need to do. I'll be waiting." The meeting took place in the penthouse's formal dining room, and despite Dante's orders to stay away, I positioned myself in the hallway where I could hear everything through the partially open door. Castellano was older than Dante, maybe 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and the weathered face of someone who'd survived decades in a brutal world. He arrived with his own guards, and the tension when he shook Dante's hand could have cut glass. "You dragged me across the city for an emergency meeting," Castellano said, accepting the offered whiskey. "This should be interesting. The Rossi are trying to start a war between us." Dante gestured to the bloodied man from earlier, now zip-tied to a chair. "Tell him." The man repeated his confession, and I watched Castellano's expression darken with each word. When the story finished, silence hung heavy in the room. "If you're lying..." Castellano started. "I have the receipts," Dante interrupted, sliding a folder across the table. "Bank transfers from Rossi accounts to his. Dates, times, amounts. Everything you need to verify." Castellano studied the documents, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "Why tell me? You could have let me believe you betrayed our treaty, used it as excuse to expand into my territory." "Because I'm not my father," Dante's voice was steady, certain. "He would have let you walk into the trap, then profited from the chaos. But I've learned something recently. Some things are worth more than territory." His eyes flickered toward the hallway, toward where I stood hidden, and I realized he knew I was there, had probably known the entire time. "The Rossis miscalculated," Dante continued. "They thought making me human would make me weak. They were wrong. It makes me smart enough to choose allies over enemies." Castellano was quiet for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Then we have an understanding. The Rossis will answer for this together." They shook, sealing whatever dark pact they'd just formed, and I slipped away before they could finish their discussion. But Dante found me in our bedroom 20 minutes later, pulling me against him with desperate relief. You heard? Every word. I pressed against his chest. You chose peace over power. I chose you over everything. He tilted my face up. The Rossies targeted my warehouse because they've been watching me, studying my weaknesses. They saw how I changed after we married, and they thought that made me vulnerable. They don't understand that you're not my weakness. You're the reason I'll fight harder than ever. What happens now? Now, Castellano and I deal with the Rossies, swiftly and permanently. His expression hardened. And then everyone in this city will understand that threatening you means declaring war on both our families. He kissed me with bruising intensity, and I tasted his fear beneath the passion. Fear of losing me, of failing to protect me, of the world discovering exactly how much power I held over him. I love you, I whispered against his mouth and felt him freeze. Don't say that unless I love you, I repeated, stronger this time. I love the monster and the man. I love your violence and your tenderness. I love that you're terrifying and terrified in equal measure. I love... He kissed me silent, and I felt wetness on my cheeks. His tears or mine, impossible to tell. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. I've loved you since you fell into my arms, he confessed. Every day since has been torture and blessing combined. You're my salvation and my damnation, Arya. My heaven and my hell. Then let's burn together. He carried me to bed, and we made love with desperate urgency, both of us aware that tomorrow would bring violence we couldn't avoid. But tonight we had each other, and that would have to be enough. The war with the Rossies lasted 3 weeks, though I only witnessed fragments of it. Dante leaving before dawn with blood in his eyes, returning after midnight with actual blood on his clothes. The penthouse became a fortress, guards stationed at every entrance, my movements restricted to the point of suffocation. But this time, the cage felt different, because Dante always came home, always found me in the dark, and held me like I was the only thing keeping him tethered to humanity. It's almost over, he whispered one night, his body wrapped around mine. Castellano and I cornered Antonio Rossi tonight. He'll surrender by morning, or he'll be dead by noon. And then you're safe. His lips pressed against my shoulder. That's all that matters. The call came at dawn. Antonio Rossi had chosen surrender, barely. The meeting to formalize terms would take place at neutral ground, witnessed by the heads of the other families. A treaty signed in blood and fear. Dante wanted me to stay home. I refused. This started because of me, I argued, watching him adjust his tie in the mirror, because they thought I made you weak. Let me show them they were wrong, Arya. Please. I moved behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist. Let me stand beside you, as your wife, as your partner. Show them that we're stronger together. The war on his face was brief but intense. Finally, he turned in my arms, cupping my face with careful hands. If anything happens, it won't. You've already won. If anything happens, he repeated firmly, you run. Marco will get you out. There's a safe house in... I kissed him quiet. Nothing's going to happen. Trust me. I do. His forehead pressed against mine. That's what terrifies me. The meeting took place in an old church. Neutral ground, sacred ground, where even criminals feared to spill blood. The pews were filled with representatives from Chicago's major families, their faces a mix of curiosity and calculation, as Dante and I walked down the aisle. I wore red, Dante's choice, a deliberate statement. The dress was elegant, conservative, but the color screamed possession and power. His hand remained on the small of my back, a brand of ownership that everyone present understood. Castellano stood at the altar with Antonio Rossi, who looked like a broken man. His suit was expensive but disheveled, his face bearing the marks of recent violence. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe regret. Mr. Salvatore, the mediator, an elderly man named Don Carmine, who'd outlived 3 generations of mob bosses, gestured to the documents laid out on the altar. The terms have been agreed upon. Mr. Rossi cedes his territory in the Eastern District and pays reparations for the stolen shipment. and the attempted manipulation. In exchange, his life and the lives of his immediate family are spared. Dante's hand tightened on my back. And the clause about my wife, any action taken against Mrs. Salvatore by any member of the Rossi family, now or in perpetuity, will be considered an act of war against both the Salvatore and Castellano families, with immediate and lethal consequences. I felt the weight of every eye in that church settle on me. Some looked curious, others resentful, but most showed something close to respect. I'd become more than just a mafia wife. I was the catalyst for an alliance, the reason two powerful families had united. Antonio Rossi stepped forward, and Dante's body went rigid with controlled violence. But Rossi simply looked at me, his expression weary. I underestimated you, Mrs. Salvatore. I thought you were a weakness to exploit. I was wrong. He turned to Dante. Your father would have started a war over pride. You chose strategy. Perhaps your wife has taught you wisdom. My wife has taught me many things, Dante replied, his voice cold. Primary among them is that some things are worth any price to protect. Remember that, Antonio, because if you or anyone in this room ever threatens her again, there won't be terms or treaties, just endings. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Don Carmine cleared his throat. Shall we sign? The documents were signed with witnesses. Ancient ritual given modern teeth. When it was finished, Castellano shook Dante's hand with genuine warmth. Your father would be proud, or furious. Probably both. He smiled at me. Mrs. Salvatore, you've done something remarkable. You've made peace more profitable than war. That's a rare gift. As we walked back down the aisle, Dante leaned close. You were magnificent. I didn't do anything. You stood beside me. That was everything. The reception afterward was held at one of Dante's legitimate businesses, an upscale restaurant where the wine flowed freely and the conversations carefully avoided specific mentions of crime. I found myself surrounded by the wives and daughters of various family heads, their questions probing but not unkind. How did you tame him? Maria Castellano asked, genuine curiosity in her eyes. Dante Salvatore, the Ice King himself. I didn't tame him. I watched Dante across the room, deep in conversation with her father. I just showed him that being human wasn't the same as being weak. And he believed you? Eventually, I smiled. He's stubborn. He's in love. I'm this from an older woman, Sophia Benedetti, whose husband controlled the city's construction unions. I've known Dante since he was a boy. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Like you hung the moon and stars. Heat crept up my neck. He's intense. Intense is one word for it. Sophia's laugh was knowing. Obsessed might be more accurate. But there are worse fates than being loved by a powerful man who'd burn the world for you. Later, as Dante and I stood on the restaurant's balcony overlooking the city, his arms wrapped around me from behind, I thought about her words. What are you thinking? He murmured against my ear. That 6 months ago I was serving pasta and dreaming of nursing school. Now I'm standing here with you, and somehow this feels more real than anything I've ever known. Regrets? So many. I turned in his arms to face him, but not this. Never this. His kiss was soft, tender. Everything his reputation claimed he couldn't be. I still owe you something. What? A choice. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Inside were acceptance letters, nursing programs, scholarships, everything I'd need to finish my education. All arranged quietly, without fanfare, while he'd been fighting a war. I can't give you back the life you should have had, he said quietly. But I can give you the future you wanted. Classes start next semester. You'll have full security, obviously, and the schedule might be complicated, but I kissed him, cutting off his nervous rambling. You did this for me? I did it for us. His hand cupped my face. I want you to have everything, Piccola. Your dreams, your career, your freedom. Within the constraints of safety, I want you to choose this life, not just endure it. I already chose. I pressed the envelope back into his hands. But I want to do it on my own terms. Part-time classes, online options, building a life that fits both of us, not just me. You're sure? I'm sure. I smiled at his bewildered expression. You spent 3 months thinking I wanted to escape. The truth is, I stopped wanting to leave the moment you stopped being my jailer and became my partner. Something in his expression cracked open, and he pulled me close with desperate strength. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. Forever? Forever. We stood there as the sun set over Chicago, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made it work. Behind us, through the windows, I could see our combined families celebrating, not a business arrangement, but genuine alliance built on mutual respect. What happens now? I asked. Now? Dante's lips curved against my temple. Now we go home. I make love to my wife. Tomorrow, we start planning your class schedule. Next week, you meet with my accountant about setting up your own accounts, because you should have money that's yours, not mine. Next month, we celebrate when the semester starts, and every day after that, we build something real. Sounds almost normal. Normal is overrated. He turned me to face him, and the love in his eyes stole my breath. But real? Real is everything. 3 years later, I stood in a hospital corridor wearing scrubs instead of designer clothes, my hands steady as I administered medication to a patient who had no idea his nurse was married to one of Chicago's most powerful men. Dante had been right. The schedule was complicated. Security followed me everywhere, and some of my classmates had figured out who I was, but I'd made it work. Graduated top of my class, landed a position at County General. Built a life that was mine, even if it existed within the framework of his world. My phone buzzed with a text. Dinner at 8? I miss you. I smiled, typing back, miss you too. See you at home. Home. The penthouse had transformed from a prison to a sanctuary, filled now with my textbooks and his business files, my nursing journals and his collection of rare whiskey. We'd learned to navigate each other's worlds, to balance his darkness with my light. Mrs. Salvatore? One of the other nurses, Jenny, poked her head into the break room. Your husband's here. I frowned. He's not supposed to pick me up for another 2 hours. Well, he's in the lobby with flowers and that smile that makes everyone forget he's terrifying. I found him exactly where Jenny said, standing near the entrance with a massive bouquet of red roses, looking completely out of place in his 3-piece suit among the sick and injured. Marco and 2 other guards hovered nearby, and several nurses were definitely staring. What are you doing here? I asked, unable to hide my smile. Couldn't wait. He handed me the flowers, then pulled me close despite our audience. I have news. What kind of news? His hand slid to my stomach, still flat, barely showing the secret we'd discovered just last week. I've been thinking about names. Joy and terror flooded through me in equal measure. We hadn't told anyone yet, hadn't even fully processed it ourselves. A baby. Our baby. Bringing new life into a world built on violence and control. Dante. I know. His forehead pressed against mine. I know it's complicated. I know the dangers. But I also know that I love you, and I'll love this child, and I'll spend every day of my life making sure you're both safe, even if it means changing, especially if it means changing. He pulled back to look at me, and the vulnerability in his eyes was stunning. I've been talking to Castellano about legitimate investments, about slowly transitioning the family business into something legal. It'll take years, maybe decades, but you'd do that? For us? I'd do anything for you. He kissed me softly. You made me human, Piccola. Now let me try being a good man, too. Around us, the hospital continued its chaos. Sirens wailing, people rushing, life and death playing out in endless cycles. But in that moment, standing in my husband's arms with our future growing inside me, I felt something I'd never expected to feel in a marriage that started with coercion and fear. I felt free. I love you, I whispered. I love you, he returned. Both of you, forever. And standing there in the lobby of County General, surrounded by the messy reality of life with a man who'd once been my captor, and was now my everything, I realized that love and possession could be the same thing, when they were chosen, when they were mutual, when they were built on respect instead of control. The Mafia boss had never touched his wife, until jealousy drove him wild, until obsession became devotion, until possession transformed into partnership, and somehow, impossibly, we'd found our way to something real. We went home together, Marco driving while Dante kept his hand protectively over my stomach, already imagining the child who would change everything. The penthouse waited, no longer a cage but a home, filled with the life we'd built from the ashes of a coerced beginning. That night, as we lay tangled in silk sheets that no longer felt cold, Dante whispered against my skin, "Thank you." For what? For falling into my arms that night, for giving me a reason to be better, for loving the monster until he remembered how to be a man. I kissed him, tasting salt and sweetness, violence and devotion. Thank you for catching me, for seeing me when I was invisible, for building a fortress around us and calling it love. Outside, Chicago glittered with 1,000 dangers and 1,000,000 secrets. But inside our sanctuary, we were safe. We were whole. We were home. And that was more than enough.